Dr. Robert Melamede, Ph.D.
Well, thank you guys for allowing me to be here. You know, it's really nice to be up in the North Country here and see what's going on. It's so beautiful. And thank, of course, Tammy for everything she does, because we all have to do something to continuously improve the state of humanity. And we're at a very critical time now, and I'm going to eventually get to showing you how the cannabinoid system is so really related into, you know, not just our health, but the health of our society and politics as well. So it is quite the big story here, and a lot of it's going to be some technical, and hopefully I'll be able to take you from the non-technical into the technical to some degree, so that you can really appreciate and understand what's going on. Let me start off by saying that I'm very, very conservative scientifically. So even though I'm typically not viewed as a conservative, scientifically I'm very conservative, and everything that I'm going to say, I can show you, I can prove to you, based on peer-reviewed science as well as what we experience as patients. So there's a very coherent story here that I want to tell you. And I want to start with physics, and then lead from physics to life, so we can understand some of the basic properties of life. Because how can we begin to understand what health is, and what disease is, and how we might restore health if we don't know what life is? You know, that's the fundamental issue here. And, you know, I was going to, I started graduate school right after, really, we learned the basic principles of molecular biology. You know, DNA, RNA, protein synthesis, and all of that. And it gave everybody the ability to understand the commonality of life. That no matter what organism you were, you could work with these principles, and DNA was the guide for really establishing the differences. But what it didn't explain at all is, how did that DNA get there? How did life get there? And what's really going on? What allows the magic of DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis? So I went and I took a course on thermodynamics. Thermo, energy, dynamics, the flow. And at that time, the only knowledge that was really formalized explained that life couldn't exist because it was too improbable. You know, if you took somebody, let's take algebra for fun, and you dissolved her down to her atomic level, and you put her in a big dye tumbler and you threw her out, what's the probability that she's going to come out?
No.
0, right? But she's here, and we're all here. So that kind of thinking, it doesn't work. And I just want to make one other, it'll seem unrelated now comment, but it'll come in later. If you were to take a cross-section at an instant in time, and then look at the molecular distribution of me, or any of us, or anything, you would see that based on the generally accepted theories that you can get there by going forward or backward in time. So we'll get into that at some later point. But so let's continue here with some of the basics. So bear with me, because it'll be a while before we get to really cannabis. You know, roll up for the Magical Mystery Tour. Because that's really what we're on. We're all on a Magical Mystery Tour, and it's got certain characteristics. And what I want to do is explain what those characteristics are, so that by understanding them, we can better live our lives, improve our lives, and those of our friends in our society, and actually the community of the biosphere. Because everything is interacting with everything else. That's the nature of the science that I want to explain. So that we start to understand how, you know, this physics of life leads to organized matter, leads to the emergence of life, and intrinsic in life are oscillations. Sleep, wake, right? That's an oscillation. Heart tightening and relaxing, breathing in, breathing out, menstrual cycles. Everything in our lives are a balance of opposing forces. And that's very critical to understand and appreciate. There's no endpoints without the other side. So yin-yang, Chinese philosophy, absolutely correct. And we're going to see how, you know, I call the endocannabinoid system the great and powerful wizard behind the curtain, because it was only in the past, 1988 that the receptors were discovered, and we knew that there was an endocannabinoid system, and yet it regulates everything in your body, everything, from conception until death. It's like the master regulator of everything in us. And we've outlawed it. The absurdity of that will continue as we continue here. So what I want to do then is look at the role of the cannabinoids in aging, and then moving on from that to cancer, and then looking at some of the basic properties of cancer cells, and in fact properties of all cells. How do we generate energy? Because we sit on top of the mechanisms of energy creation. And as life became more complex, that energy could be used for more complex phenomena, like our social structure, our iPods, anything. Complexity is built on simplicity, all right? But everything starts to bottom up, and that's an important lesson, because that's the truth on the level of physics, and everything that we are is a manifestation of how that physics generated more complexity over evolutionary time, let alone, of course, within our lifetimes. So we'll go from there to something very important that I have to, I'm going to comment on it now so I don't forget, all right? And that's this role of acetylcholine in dysphoria. So make sure everybody remembers the term citicholine, not acetylcholine, citicholine, C-I-T-I choline. You take 5 times more of that than you take of cannabis extract, like you're taking a gram a day of ricksentinol, you take 5 grams of that, you don't get high, all right? Where it dramatically reduces it. So people who have, who are on edibles, every dispensary should have citicholine in it so that people can buy it, so you can have some in your house. So when you eat too much by mistake, or your dog does, or a kid does, you can fix the situation very critically and quickly. And this is something that our hospitals and our doctors should be aware of as cannabis medicine, cannabis food increases and spreads further around the world. The genie is out of the box. There's no turning it back now. It's a matter of how many people will suffer before the idiots realize that they're harming other people. And we'll go into the role of cannabinoids in that process. It's a very, very interesting story here. So what we'll be looking at then, is the role of cannabinoids in various infections, because of how profound it can be. And I'll just mention it up front. We can control HIV with only cannabis and some nutritional supplements, based on the theories that I'm going to present to you. But we've seen it happen. It's real. It works. We can control carposes with it as well. And I believe we can also control Ebola with it for the same underlying scientific rationale. So this is some of the things that I'm working on, trying to assemble critical people to make that happen. But once that truth gets out there, it's over. There are millions of people dying from these diseases in terms of HIV, and of course the fear of spreading Ebola has become rather acute at this point. And we know, Steve Covey and I put a article, a little press release out many, many years ago on the use of cannabis for influenza. So certain types of viruses under certain conditions can be properly controlled. And it's, you can't stop it anymore. Carposis is the #1 cancer in Africa. We can control it with something they can grow in their backyards over there, and we're letting these people suffer and die. It's absolutely unacceptable. And again, everything works from bottom up. So we are the bottom. We've got to work our way up. And the way we work our way up is knowledge and truth. And that's what I'm trying to, present as how I've learned to understand what life is, and how, as I started to realize more and more what's going on, how I saw how it echoes through the layers of our society. And that we're at a critical point now where we're going to have to do things. So I'll continue now with less of the politics, more of the biology. So in order to appreciate the vast potential of cannabis medicines to positively impact human health and understanding of physical basis of life, we've already gone into this, all right? But the last line there is very critical. Flowing energy organizes matter and results in emergent oscillatory behavior, the balance of opposing forces, all right? Flowing energy, like the sun hitting the planet, will generate life.
Yes.
The food we eat generates life. It's all part of a story where flowing energy. You know, you can't cork up either end. You know, you're not going to live if either end is no longer flowing. And flow is the critical term here. What flow means on a subcellular level. And that's what we're going to see. And we're going to see it first in a system that really is explained by this physics. What is life? This new physics that is typically not taught in our schools. It's not taught in most of our universities. Despite the fact that Ilya Prigogine got the Nobel Prize, where's this picture? In 1977 for his work on what's known as dissipative structures. We're all dissipative structures. Everything within us, all the layers of our complexity are dissipative structures. And what that simply means is we dissipate waste. But we dissipate waste more so than if we weren't here. And that's what actually becomes consistent with basic laws of physics, the second law of thermodynamics that says entropy, which is disorder, must increase, all right? So this is a very beautiful statement, not made by him, but one that he liked because it encompasses his concepts, which are different from the general world view and are intrinsically different from the kinds of teaching that goes on in our schools, where biology remains a black box. You know, so no matter what your field you're in, you learn all these specifics about the field, but what's really going on is what life is. And we don't explain that. And that's what I've tried to explain to myself, and because I'm satisfied with my explanation, I want to share it. So the more deeply, and I owe everything to this man here. This is probably the smartest man that has ever lived. All right? So the more deeply we study the nature of time, the better we understand that duration means invention, creation, and forms, continuous elaboration of the absolutely new. Continuous creation, as long as energy can flow. That is what's natural. The creation of life is not something impossible, it's something that must happen. So regardless of what, religious thoughts you have, this is the way we work. You can say this is how God made it. For me, God means generalized open system dynamics, GOD, which is physics. But nevertheless, this is how we work. So whatever flavor of belief, because science is a belief as well. I believe that reproducibility matters, It's all a matter of faith in science, faith in whatever. So anyway, the key here is that there's this all-pervasive creative nature in the universe. Starting with the Big Bang, starting wherever you want it to start to be, but this is how it works. And what he addresses in his work, and that's what this is telling you right here, we are actually the children of the arrow of time, of evolution, not as progenitors. For those of you who are interested in quantum theory, quantum theory says that nothing happens until you measure it. Well, that would mean that we create the universe by measuring. He says that's ridiculous. The universe created us. So this is an example of the physics that provides the foundation for understanding this creative nature and how flowing energy organizes matter. So this is known as the Barnard instability. And it's particularly nice for a lot of, the next one's particularly nice. In this case here, what we have is a petri dish with about 10 mLs in it, all right? So not a whole lot of liquid. And it's heated from below. And everything that we're taught in our school systems is that when you heat a liquid, the only things that are going to happen is that the molecules are going to move around faster, they're going to spin around faster, and they're going to vibrate faster, all right? And if you had a chemical reaction happening, that chemical reaction would happen fast, all right? There is nothing that says you will get a spontaneous formation of a pattern, of an organized system, a collection of dumb, innate, molecules collaborating with one another to form these structures. Now let me explain a little about what they are. So what you're seeing, this is a magnification of that, and you see that it's a hexagon. Now if you were to take that and flip it on its side, so what you're seeing is up here, okay? What you would see is that the heat from below is driving the hot molecules up the side, then they're going across the top, giving up their heat to the environment, and then funneling back down in that little toilet bowl flush in the middle, okay? And that keeps happening. These are flow-dependent structures. The flowing energy is organizing mass, all right? And it's in, you know, if you were to say, what's the probability of me throwing a liquid 10 mLs into this Petri dish and having it form a structure like this? 0. But you can do this again and again. This is what's real. So in the next example, this is called the Belazov-Zhabotinsky reaction. And this is the one that I particularly appreciate for 2 reasons. On the one hand, it was developed to be a model of something known as the Krebs cycle. It's part of how our cells generate energy, okay? But on the other hand, when it was discovered by Zhabotinsky in the 50s and he went to publish it, and you'll appreciate more about what he was trying to publish in a second, he couldn't get it published because the powers that be, you know, those all enlightened powers that be, said this is impossible because it violates the second law of thermodynamics, that entropy, disorder, must always increase. Because here we're seeing organization occurring, all right? Can't be. So he couldn't get it published for many, many years. So eventually it was published, and what I want to show you are kind of the thing in action here. So this is a Petri dish where the reactants, the chemicals were mixed together and then they sit for a second. And in this liquid is a compound that tells you what's called the redox state of a molecule, whether or not it's got energy pumped into it, kind of. Like the food we eat, carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, okay, carbohydrates. And what life is about, in many respects, is burning that food. And what do? We make CO2, carbon dioxide that we spit out in water vapor, right? So we convert something that has ultimately electrons in the form of hydrogens, forced on, so there's energy there, and then we release it through our metabolism, and then we give away our waste, okay? So this is a model of that, because as those electrons pass, the system goes from oxidized to reduced, oxidized, reduced, all right? That's just another name for taking electrons or getting rid of them, all right? So there's a chemical in here that gives you color depending on the redox state of its environment. And what you'll see is that, again, we see heterogeneity. We see structure forming based on flowing energy. And in this case, the energy is caused by a reaction. So there you're seeing patterns coming up. That should not happen based on conventional thinking. But it's this kind of organization that gets pyramided over billions of years to create life and evolution and us. And these things come and go. Again, back to the idea that we have oscillations all the time, okay? So, you know, this is a very critical little picture here to see this reaction, and it'll continue to go until the chemicals are used up. But what makes this thing thermodynamically sound, so to speak, is that essentially what you have is a collection of molecules getting smarter as long as they can make their environment, the universe, stupider quicker. That's why we're here. All right? To make the universe stupider quicker. That's how we came here. We are organization. It's not simply us as individuals. It's us in the whole swarm of the biochemistry and the geochemistry of the planet, all working together, interacting. If any of you are familiar, remember the old Gaia hypothesis. That's reality. The Earth is like a living organism in that it's doing these redox reactions. It's taking sunlight. It's using that to create organization. That organization occurs as the prebiotic soup at the emergence of life, and then of creation of human species. Here I'm doing it in a test tube, just so you can see when it's more in a three-dimensional than a two-dimensional plane, but it gives you see the oscillations better, they're coming and going. So obviously it's mixed, fully random, and then what you see is coming off the bottom in a minute or so, that blue color of the indicator, and then moves up the tester. There you go. All right, and then so it's gone now. The heart relaxed again, if you want to use the analogy, or the menstrual cycle went away, and then it's going to come back again in another second. And the timing of that is dependent on the chemicals that are there. You know, our brains are all EEGs, our heart, we got our EKGs. Every way you look, everything's about these kinds of rhythms, okay? So that's an important thing to understand, that oscillations are an intrinsically natural property, all right? What you're seeing here, and I'm not going to go into the details at all, but are different chemicals that are involved in how cells live, how cells make energy. And you see, again, oscillations, okay? So, and this was done actually in cells that were ground up, but retains the enzymatic properties of the living cell. The thing that's so amazing is this is still not taught in most of our biology classes, that in our very essence are the flow of energy, organizing matter, creating oscillations. This paper was published, I think, in 1967. You know, Prigogine got the Nobel Prize in 1977. So why is our educational system so slow in adapting? And again, we'll get back to this whole idea of population change of consciousness later on, once we get more into the cannabinoids. So, free radicals and stress. What is stress? All right, we all know stress. Oh, you know, I got a test coming, or oh, I got cancer, or you know, all of those things that cause stress, right? But stress actually occurs anytime there is any change in one of those flow-dependent structures, because it has to adapt to the change. Okay, and the way we have developed our complexity is we rely very much on the mechanism by which we generate energy. There's a very efficient energy generating mechanism known as the electron transport system. So as evolution generates complexity, you got to use that more because that's the most efficient way, and the system keeps getting smarter, because the smarter we get, the stupider we can make the universe. So anyway, as energy flows through living systems, utilizing this efficient process, which occurs in subcellular organelles, little factories within the cell known as mitochondria. All right? And as the energy is being processed and created in the form of ATP for the cells to use, they generate intrinsically something called free radicals. And free radicals are chemicals that have what's known as an unpaired electron. And electrons like to always be in pairs. So if they have an unpaired one, it's looking for a pair. And that's what makes reactions happen. Okay? So free radicals are very powerful because they can react with anything, especially depending on which free radical you're talking about. Some are more reactive than others. Some react at the instant that they're formed, at the rate of diffusion. And they react with your DNA, your RNA, your proteins, and they modify them. And we make those free radicals as a result of the need to adjust to change, right? And this is such a powerful, fundamental point of the cannabinoid system, the concept of adjusting to change, adapting to change. Because as complexity occurred, the behavior of a living entity becomes more complicated. It can only be more complicated if itself is more complicated. You know, how can you match with an environment if you can't absorb its complexity? And you can only absorb its complexity if you have a mate to that complexity. So anyway, what the whole deal here is that stress creates free radicals. Free radicals damage us, but those damages in turn, aside from being damaging, they feed back and they promote change. So they act as signals. And this is something that's really become apparent, you know, within the past decade or so, that aside from free radicals being damaging, free radicals are necessary for adaptation. And adaptation is such a critical word here. Homeostasis, the dynamic balance of opposites. So think of a seesaw.
that's in balance, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, instead of a static seesaw, flowing over here and flowing so that the flows are in balance. And one of the basic flows that has to be in balance, again, balance of opposing forces, is synthesis and degradation. Because without synthesis and degradation, how do you get flow? You know, it's not that the food gets something pulled out of it and comes out. What's coming out, you know, in our different ways is us. Because we build ourselves and we break ourselves down. And when we become adults, we're no longer growing so much. And you all know you stop healing so nicely. And we start to descend back towards equilibrium. What this is really all about is having a system that's far from equilibrium, charged with the battery of life. And then life, as we age, aging is the progressive discharge of that battery. We can't retain it anymore appropriately. But the things that move us further from equilibrium are the things that are good for us. And the things that accelerate our decline towards equilibrium. And when I say equilibrium, I mean that our flow becomes insufficient to maintain the organization. And just the way ice melts, we melt, so to speak. But the ice is a static structure. You just bring it to the right temperature, you have ice. You know, you let it warm and you have liquid again. We are flow dependent, not equilibrium based on our interaction in a static sense with our environment, I'm at this temperature, but rather through the flow and how the flow changes, because we are these flow dependent structures. So homeostasis is the balance, and it occurs throughout us on all levels. That's what your hormones are doing, that's what your nerves are doing, that's what everything in your body is doing. It's trying to adjust to the changing environment in such a way that it can maintain the structure of us. But that structure transcends us because we are part of a bigger structure, our society, our family, our society, community. You know, you can just go through the layers of organization, and they all are natural emergent phenomena as a result of this physics and the fact that the sun is happy enough to shine on us, and we have geothermal energy in the planet as well, that created the chemical diversity that led to the formation of prebiotic structures like I'm talking to, that led to a nonlinear change and the formation of life. All right? So that's what it's all about. And if you perturb the biochemical flow, as I mentioned, you're going to tend to make more free radicals. Those free radicals are going to interact with all of, you know, the biological compounds, and other parts of our organization will see that these things have gotten changed by free radicals, and then they'll go and talk to something else and say, hey, we got to fix what you're doing over here, it's too strong, or maybe we got to just shut you down and do something else so that we don't make too many free radicals, because free radicals ultimately are responsible for all age-related illnesses. All right? And this, now we're getting close to talking about the cannabinoid system in a second here. So any disharmony at any scale produces free radical inducing stress. So it could be within your cell. You got a photon of ultraviolet light because you're in the sun, hits a piece of your DNA, damages your DNA. Well, you've created stress within the cell, and the cell senses that stress and tries to fix it by adapting the flow to maintaining things, again, in a more harmonious fashion. So again, all of this dissipative structures, flow-dependent structures, well, what is flowing? The food we eat, the energy released from it, as we oxidize it, you know, redox, remember? We take the reduced and we burn it. Oxidation, redox, all right? But then, what's really monitoring what's flowing, okay? Well, it turns out, that our immune system is what balances the flow of material, the matter that flows through us. You know, your gut is loaded with immune cells. I think it's 65% of your immune system is surrounding your gut. Well, why? Because that's where most of the molecules are entering in, your food. You can't do without it, but you don't want to do the wrong thing, so we learn which foods don't make us sick. And if you're unfortunate enough to eat something that's really toxic, it's going to come out both ends, right? It's because your immune system sensed it, and they communicate with their environment Again, organization, and get rid of this quick, you know? So anyway, where are we here? Yeah, and what monitors information, because there's only two things that can come into us, right? Mass or energy. And energy comes into us in the form of information. We're seeing something, we're hearing something, we're tasting, smelling, feeling. That's all information causing changes within us. So our nervous system monitors the flow of information and energy, whereas the immune system monitors the flow of mass. The mosquito bites you, the virus gets into you, the bacteria that you inhale, all right? That is getting mass into you. So here's a picture of it's an interesting one actually. What you're looking at here are certain of the high energy containing molecules known as NADPH, all right? So it's reduced, it's got that energy in it, and it happens to have the property that when you hit it with a certain wavelength of light, it'll emit light at another wavelength that you can then screen properly so you can see it. That's called fluorescence, okay? And that molecule, NADPH, has natural fluorescence to it. So what you're seeing here is a cell, and this cell is a neutrophil, which is like the first line of defense in your immune system, all right? These are the foot soldiers of your immune system. And you're seeing that there's a concentration of this NADPH in you is moving in that way, touching and in harmony. But it's important to realize that harmony does not mean health. Because you can have harmony that's killing you, or you can have harmony that's helping you. The key is how do you manipulate it in a holistic fashion so that you shift the gestalt of whatever you're looking at. And your cannabinoid system, because it regulates everything, has the ability to move you in that healthier direction, as evidenced by the knockout mouse that can't get high, and as evidenced by this woman who obviously, she died at 125 years. Yeah. So, and this relates to some of the earlier talks and how important it is for us. The fact that our government has outlawed an anti-aging drug that kills cancer is proof of incompetence.
Yeah, right.
They are incompetent.
Right.
The thing that's so frightening is, we pay all of our taxes. So on a local level, we have our local police. And what are they? Trained investigators. Well, I got 12,000 articles on this computer about the endocannabinoid system. The abstracts are all freely available on PubMed. Well, wouldn't the trained investigator utilize the national government's database to inquire as to what might be occurring with cannabis? And of course the federal government robs even more money. And what do? They fascist Nazis about this issue. No medical value. Well, we'll patent it, speaking out of both sides of their mouth as usual, and we will get into what I believe is going on there. Cannabinoid deficiency. So we'll go into that. So here we see cannabis and cancer. I want to look into that. Cannabis, something is not playing correctly here. Let me see what we got here. Well, anyway, this is my database, and in this particular one that came up, it was dealing with cannabinoids and the immune system. Back at this time, I only had 12,000 articles on cannabinoids. Now it's up, getting closer to 14,000. And we see that there's 76 of them that are specifically popping up with my autoimmune search term. All right. And what's the first one? The one I have highlighted here. Do cannabinoids have therapeutic role in transplantation? And the answer is yes, they do, because they inhibit the rejection by modulating the immune system so that it's less inflammatory, because it's inflammation that's very much involved in the rejection process, right? So, cardiovascular system, here we see at the heart of the matter, the endocannabinoid system and cardiovascular function and dysfunction. And one of the things you got to be careful of when you look at a lot of these studies that are done, because it's such a pain in the butt to try to do anything with marijuana or with THC because of the Nazis running everything. What it used to be really easy to do, now I've tightened up on that as well, is you could buy the synthetics. As a researcher, I could go online and order a THC you know, a CB1 agonist, something that stimulates the CB1. That's what's in spice, for example. And I could use it in tissue culture experiments, all right? Unfortunately, those tissue culture experiments have no immune system, no nervous system, and they're stimulating one little arm of a much bigger endocannabinoid system, of which most people are at least aware of the CB2. There's a lot more to it way beyond that. But the point here is the CB1 and the CB2 receptors do opposite things. The CB1 receptor protects you from free radical production by modulating calcium within the mitochondria, which is where you make the ATP and burn your fuel. Okay? So, I forgot what it was.
CB2 or something.
Anyway, so we see it's involved with the endocannabinoid system, with the cardiovascular system on this fundamental level. Yeah, what I was saying is you got to watch the studies that are using CB1 or CB2 specific agonists or antagonists, because the cannabinoid system balances both sides of the story. Your CB1 turns on a protective mode of fat burning. All right, and it's very technical as to why and how, so I'm not going to go into that. But what you got to know is that fat burning in general is protective. That's why caloric restriction is good. That's why so many religions have fasting days. They evolved things that were beneficial. Okay, those of you who are familiar with resveratrol, the active ingredient in red wine, that has very good anti-aging properties. They all work by manipulating the energy pathways. And again, neurons die easy because they make free radicals while they're using this electron transport system, and those free radicals trigger apoptosis, which is an organized collapse of the cell rather than blowing apart, being extremely inflammatory. This controls the death a little bit. All right, so we see cardiovascular function. We see here 194 articles at that time. If we look at whatever comes up next, the nervous system, you know, I got 830 articles of, you know, over 13,000 now. And if you just look at the, you know, what's going on here, introduction, cannabis in the brain, cannabis use over the millennia, a bird's eye view, THC and cannabidiol, endocannabinoid receptor, CB1 receptor, CB2 receptor, on and on. Cannabinoids system and anxiety and depression, cannabinoids and reward systems. You know, all of the drugs of abuse funnel through the cannabinoid system. So most people, if they're using cannabinoids, are going to satisfy whatever the ultimate functionality of that system is. Whatever's going on that they feel the need to stimulate that system, and they're using all the wrong things. The right thing is the way we work. Endocannabinoids, well, all right. Take your essential fatty acids and take your pot. Screw amphetamines and cocaine and alcohol. Those are rewarding you in the same fashion that cannabis rewards you. So use the real thing. They go through the cannabinoid pathways. They're an excuse for not using pot. Pot is the answer for not using them. All right, here we have the skeletal system. You know, again, it's this idea of synthesis, balance between synthesis and degradation. When you're young, your bones are growing, you're healthy and happy. You get old, especially women, when they stop producing estrogen and they're not synthesizing new bones in the same rate. So, pharmaceutical approach. All right, well, we have a cell called an osteoclast that breaks down bone. And we have a cell that makes bone, osteoblast. And if you're not making enough and you're breaking down too much, that's what happens with aging. So the logic of the pharmaceutical company was, well, we'll find a magic bullet that will prevent the osteoclast from breaking down the bone. All right, but what have they done? They've inhibited flow. You know, they stuck a cork up your bone's ass, basically. So you've inhibited flow here. And what's the consequence? One of these drugs that women are using, they would step off the sidewalk and they'd get a fractured hip because their bones became thicker but brittle. Because what are they doing? They're manufacturing dead bone. Dead bone is not the same as live bone. All right? And depending on now how experiments are done with CB1 versus CB2, you can look at good or bad things, but the reality is the mixture and combination with everything else. So here we see the role of cannabinoids in the regulation of bone remodeling. I mean, I don't make this stuff up. We've got 13,000 articles here, and I've got another 13,000 that support from non-cannabinoid literature the things that I'm telling you. I'm a very conservative scientist. I'm mentally ill. I sit around stoned and read this all the time. So I'm going to show you some pictures now of cancer. Some very gross pictures in many cases. But it'll hopefully drive home the reality. Because these were skin cancers, so you could visually just watch what was going on. But first, a little scientific support, all right? So we had over 900 articles on cannabinoids and cancers, all right? When I was at that meeting, you know, the doctor was trying to take away our little cancer patient there, our little cancer boy. She would not even look at the article that addressed exactly the issue that they were trying to, why they were trying to use cannabis. You know, vincristine causes neuropathy. Cannabis protects against neuropathy. I mean, put two and two together. The oncologist refused my card and refused to look at the article. These are people that were going to help us. Thankfully, they're not all like that. But there are way too many that are like that, which is why we have to arm ourselves with knowledge. The doctors are armed with knowledge from the pharmaceutical companies. They have the one bullet, non-holistic approach. That is not life, as I've shown you. So let's embrace what life is in its multi-dimensional richness and try to start to learn how we can manipulate things in a way to promote health, happiness, and a sane, sustainable social structure. We'll get into that. And am I going too long here?
Never.
I can't see that. No. 15 minutes. Yeah, just started.
I know, back it all later.
All right, so here it shows, just read the title, receptor-dependent, receptor-independent signaling, a therapeutic target for regulating cancer growth. It works by so many mechanisms, but it doesn't work all the time. I have to emphasize that my husband-in-law just died of lung cancer. He was on good, high-quality oil all the time. Didn't work. It helped him, you know, go through the exit, but it didn't stop him from going through the exit. So here's a picture of a woman's arm. She's Australian. You got all these fair-skinned limeys that left the London fog so they can get skin cancer in the equatorial sun. She has it, two of her sisters have it, both her brothers have it, her mother and father has it. They grew up on a sugarcane farm. So this was right when they started putting the cannabinoid tar on it. And it's a couple of months, it took about 3 months with this. Squamous cells are much nastier to get rid of than the basal cells. Basal cells literally fall off in a few days to a few weeks, depending on the individual. They just, you know, sometimes they just disappear, other times you get like a scab and it falls off, but it works. So here what you see is something different. It expels the cancer from underneath and forces it out onto the surface, and that black you see, that's necrosis, the kind of cell death that's not very nice, and it just bursts open and dies. And here, over time, it progressed, and you see more and more of it dying. And any of you who have ever used the tar, as I call it tar, Brixton's oil extract, whatever you want to call it. I call it tar because it's so sticky. Especially if you're using like the butane hash oil, it's very, very sticky. And it gets all over everything, you can't get it off. So we would put saran wrap over it so it wouldn't get over the bed at night. And in the morning, on the left here, the saran wrap was lifted off and the whole top of the tumor came off. Yeah. This is cannabis therapy, right? We'll just lift the saran wrap off. And here, as time progressed, it got better and better. And in the end, it was biopsied and it was clean. This little man, in contrast, had what the doctor said was the worst case of squamous cell they've ever seen in their lives. Those holes went like 2 inches down, filled with fluid. He had to change his pillows all the time because of the stink. You know, it was nasty. And then the doctor said, you got the worst case, we're not going to be able to help you unless we cut off your skull and remove your scalp, etc. He said, no, you're crazy. He went to a radiation oncologist who turned out to be equally as crazy. This is what his head looked like after 130 irradiation treatments. You know, this is criminal insanity. And what he had in the end, you see here, here, and you can't see back there, but he had 3 tumors that were left that were fully radiation resistant. When you have resistant cancers and you try treating with lethal type agents, you make them grow. Because by growing, they don't make enough free radicals to kill themselves, they just divide. That's an alternative. They use the energy, okay? So he contacted me and we helped him out. We started putting the extracts on, and you can see how it's starting to eat away the cancer. And his oncologist said, you know, this is so amazing. We have nothing in our medical armaments that can do this. Put it all over his head because we don't know where it is. We did. He was also taking it internal by that time because of the pain. You can imagine the pain this man was through. That's what it looked like after he put it all over his head. This man had his skull exposed. This is skull right here, right? That's skull. It ate right down to the bone when 130 irradiations couldn't touch it. Alright? So, yeah, and he had it open and exposed like that for over a year and never got an infection. And then he had to go to the hospital for something else. And he got an infection, not only there, and he had to go back and forth for different, you know, related issues that were happening as a result of that initial infection. He goes and he winds up getting a systemic bacterial infection. They give him an antibiotic, he's allergic to it, he dies. So, this is what I want to make sure everybody's aware of. The citicoline, notice the spelling, C-I-T-I, choline, all right? That will, and the person who discovered this was Janet Sweeney from the Phoenix Tears Foundation. You should all check out her website. Janet's an amazing person, helps a tremendous number of people. This is what it's really called, cytidine diphosphate. You know, again, within the idea of oscillations, low doses of cannabis are euphoric, high doses of cannabis are dysphoric. Cannabis inhibits acetylcholine production. That's associated with the dysphoria. You take citicoline, it ups your acetylcholine level and counteracts those paranoia, fear, and all of the negative aspects of taking too much cannabis. Here is the article that we were looking for. So unfortunately, our doctors are not educated. Only 13% of them mentioned the term endocannabinoid. Remember, this is the major neurotransmitter in our brain, and we don't teach it to our doctors. It's not that there's a conspiracy not to teach it. They don't know. The teachers don't know. How are they supposed to learn? You know, they're not here at this seminar. They're not reading this literature because they're too busy filling out Medicaid forms and insurance forms. You know, we are in an economic medical health crisis. And what's the solution? Cannabis. The estimates. How much Alzheimer's disease is going to occur over the next decades will bankrupt the healthcare system. Cannabis, by virtue of its neuroprotective properties, inhibits the development of cannabinoids. They know on a molecular level how it affects the proteins that are responsible for the formation of, for the development of Alzheimer's disease. The same with Huntington's disease and Hunting-Greer, and a variety of these neurological disorders, Parkinson. There are benefits to cannabis in so many places, but it doesn't work all the time, and it's not the final solution. Not to use a bad quote, but what you need, what I imagine we will need is herbal supplements to shift the biochemistry in the direction beyond what the cannabis is doing, to target specific pathways that develop more robustly to compensate for whatever people are trying to do to kill the cell. And the plasticity of metabolism within the cell is what it's all about. In terms of not being able, the whole Sanjay Gupta story, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Cannabidiol, while it doesn't seem to be the answer for cancer, maybe it'll turn out to be, but at this point, from all the anecdotal data, it's no. You need your THC. They filmed me for 3 days, but obviously what I say is not credible. But they did a better thing, because what they did was they pushed the whole CBD story. and the Fiji, little Charlotte's Web there. So that opened up the world, and I go around, I talk to people all around the country, and all around the world actually. CBD is not the cure-all for everything, but CBD is perfect and all you need for seizure disorder. And these poor kids have hundreds of seizures a day, so bad that it totally knocks out their development. That most dedicated, I'm gonna start crying, I have PTSD and I can't deal with kids with sickness, but I was just down in South Carolina with a bunch of mothers, and one after another, they were up there crying, telling their stories to these legislators. Hopefully they will hear. You know, it's such a horrible tragedy. So the cannabinoid system inhibiting information, we've been going through all of this now. I'm trying to hurry up. We cannot evolve fast enough because evolution has continuously increased the use of the cannabinoid system. So now we are hopefully smart enough to know that we must consume cannabis. Cannabis is an essential nutrient. We should all be increasing our cannabinoid level. That's what happened evolutionarily. You got the receptors first appearing with vertebrates, and it kept increasing its activity to the point that you needed the CB2 receptor. That evolved later. It's in mother's milk, everybody. It's in mother's milk. So backward-looking people are people who are cannabinoid deficient. They can't adjust to change. These are the people that congregate and concentrate in government. Doesn't mean everyone there is like this, but in general, half the population is going to be cannabinoid endowed for any particular of the everything that it does, and the other half is going to be cannabis deficient. That's an unavoidable truth. So what are the consequences of being cannabinoid endowed? You can't adjust to stress. How do you prevent stress? You prevent change. All right? If you've been, and it turns out also, I didn't have a chance to go into it, but if you're cannabis deficient, like those knockout mice, you can't relearn. You can learn something the first time. You know, you watch Free from Madness and now you know forever. And you can't watch Sanjay Gupta and relearn it. All right? So those people are what I call blips, backward-looking people. I think they congregate in government. They promote, you know, the whole alcohol, aggression, anger, non-cooperative, dominant mentality. Those are the people who dominate. That's why they're in government. Who do they dominate? The cannabinoid endowed people who are mellow. We must take back our rights now. Yeah. Obviously something unique, and we've got these idiots who have proven their incompetence, throwing hundreds of thousands of people in jail. How can we tolerate this? There is no intelligent person on the planet who knows what I'm describing to you who could possibly not support cannabis use. They'd have to be cannabinoid deficient like those mice. I'm almost done. Open-mindedness, you know, if you have cannabinoids, you can look into the future and adjust to it. You're optimistic.
What about anger on pot?
Most people aren't, you know. Colorado, family disputes went way down in Denver when they legalized. This is the ultimate insanity here. It's in mother's milk. So my favorite joke now is, should we arrest nursing mothers? Or should we just arrest all women for walking around with paraphernalia? Technically, according to the law, we should.
Professor, can you tell me what structure in the human breast secretes cannabinoids?
It's a sweat gland. It's in the milk.
What structure actually secretes cannabinoids that would be in the milk?
The structure that's making the milk, the cells that are secreting the milk, or secreting the fat.
Is there a special cell?
Pardon me?
Is there a special cell that secretes
I don't remember much about the structure of the mammary duct type, you know, there's little chambers, it breaks up. It's kind of like a lung that makes sweat that turns into milk, and it's full of cannabinoids. But they need it to protect their brains, to stimulate their appetite. If you use an inhibitor in newborn mice, they die. That's what all this is about. So blips and flips, we got our backward-looking people, we're all familiar with them. We got our forward-looking people. How many history's leaders have been good guys? We got Mandela and Gandhi, you know, maybe Jimmy Carter. The rest of them are, you know, warmongers, basically. 5 minutes, all right, we're hurrying up. It turns out, and we'll go into it at all, that you know, politics is dictated by our biology to a large degree, and that every one of these cases, these are all from peer-reviewed articles, you could trace it back ultimately to cannabinoids. They're everywhere, doing everything all the time. So what kind of society do we want to have? One run by backward-looking people or one run by forward-looking people? You know, it's time to make this change. This is my friend's garden in Colorado. This is only a little piece of it. It's the largest indoor grow. It's 47,000 square feet. It produces 500 pounds of bud a month. And this is now becoming a smaller unit. So anyway, the current policies are inhumane. Marijuana policies are inhumane. We've got to change them. They're based on fear, ignorance, and greed, which is, of course, partly determined by genetics of who's in government there. In reality, cannabis prohibition is a fundamental violation of human rights. This is a very important point that I want to make. It's the cannabinoid deficient people who can't adapt to change, who are not likely to try new things. So they're the people who don't try cannabis. When they talk about children being more, what's the term that they use if they use cannabis? Basically more adventurous and doing the wrong things. That's the subset of kids. They're the naturally endowed kids who embrace change and try things out. All right? So a lot of the studies are crazy because they haven't checked out what's going on. They have these studies on withdrawal, you know. Well, hey, I use cannabis to sleep. I'm not going to sleep as good if I don't use it. Well, is that because I was addicted to cannabis? Well, you know, in a sense, yeah. It's a necessary nutrient. I have a nutritional deficiency. Don't take away my food. So anyway, the point is that the laws of prohibition are made by people who are genetically different. Now, if you look at race, a black person has a couple of genes that make them black. So you could have a white person who is mostly white but looks black, and they're protected by law because of their skin color. That's a representation of their biochemistry. Well, our biochemistry, if we like to use cannabis, is different than the people who are trying to throw us in jail for using it. It's racism. It's a fundamental violation of human rights. It's racism. It's a group throwing another group based on their genetics into jail and preventing them from reproducing.
Right on. Right on.
Here's the solution. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.